Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar. Today we are talking about the modern CMS development stack. This has a couple of different connotations, two different directions we can look at it, and how this has developed as a trend that we're seeing and that we're following and that we are contributing to. And we want to discuss those. Quickly, let me introduce myself. My name is Svetla Yankova. I'm a solutions consultant with Sitefinity, and I have worked with Sitefinity for quite some time, and I'm really excited to talk to you about these topics today because I have been excited to sort of shift directly into MVC and working with Kendo UI and working with AngularJS through quite some time now, and it has been an interesting shift for myself, for the different customers that I have worked with, for different partners that work with us. And so, it's interesting to share with you some of the tips and tricks of how to actually sort of get from A to JavaScript and get from A to application really quickly with using modern tools and techniques. And also, you'll see in the presenters today John Bristow, Principal Developer Advocate for Telerik. Now, John has been great throughout this whole process. Unfortunately, he lost his voice last minute, so he wouldn't be able to talk right now, but huge credit goes to him for helping out with a lot of the topics and inspiration and ideas here. So thanks a lot, John. And so with that said, we have a lot of content packed in. I actually have, developed just quite a bit of code just to talk about the different layers of what I call the CMS development stack. We can go through them real quick. A couple of announcements first. So first off, in your GoToMeeting box, you will see a questions box. So please feel free to type in any questions in the chat. We'll try to address them either live or through the chat, or follow up with you later on after the demo, and make sure that all your questions are addressed. Second, this will be available as a recording. Basically the same page that you used to register. We'll host the recording, we'll post the recording on YouTube, and we'll follow up with you guys with the links to that as well. So stay tuned for that. You can get the recording for this later as well. And then I want to start with very recent and very neat announcement, which tends to talk about this part. So right now and today I'm talking about using Sitefinity as a base and sort of getting as quick as possible into just controllable modern HTML and JavaScript and doing the things that we're used to, but still taking a lot of the things that the CMS gives for granted. And a large part of what you can use and build out using JavaScript is by using Kendo UI. So Kendo UI gives you these great data visualizations, these great controls, and starting from, I believe it was June 1st, Kendo Professional, the new license, so as you may be aware, Kendo UI came up with an announcement and went open source, so all the widgets are now open source on GitHub. You can freely use them for your commercial projects, but part of those widgets are part of a professional license. So I believe the Kendo Grid and the scheduler and some of the data viz widgets are part of a professional license, which means that they are licensed for commercial use within Kendo. The announcement that I wanted to make and share with you is that if you're using Sitefinity within the context of Sitefinity, you get all those widgets bundled in. We use them extensively in the back end of the system, in the back end of the CMS, and you guys can use them as well. With the asterisk, of course, that this applies only within the context of Sitefinity. If you need to use it for an external project and you need the professional widgets, then the regular licensing applies. So with that said, we're going to talk about a few things. So I'm going to show mostly code. I even don't really have a presentation. This is kind of hosted in a spa fashion in a Sitefinity page. And I'm going to show an example or two of using Sitefinity and just getting into using some JavaScript and some Angular and some Kendo. I'm also going to show some best practices that I have found out to be useful, some tricks that I have found out to be useful. Basically, the best possible way to get from idea to JavaScript, and just start working and tweaking that UI and those interactions that you want to make perfect for your users. So the topic is split in these topics. Of course, we're going to be building on top of Sitefinity. I'm not going to talk into great depth into doing a demo or an overview of Sitefinity because that is a very extensive topic by itself. Feel free after that, if you're not familiar with the system, to check out sitefinity.com, check out some of the videos, or let us know, and I or one of my colleagues will be happy to give you sort of a quick demo of some of the basics of page creation, of website creation, of creating multi-sites, of creating websites and intranets, or anything like that. That said, this is not going to be extensively covered here. What is going to be extensively covered is this flow from idea to data structure to module to interrelated modules, exposing the data for them from the front end, exposing that into HTML and JavaScript and JSON and services, and then using Kendo UI and JavaScript. So this is the sort of stack that I wanted to present to you guys, and the ideas that this happens to be or tends to be the new way that people build stuff on top of Sitefinity, as well as build stuff in general. So for example, this part, the UI for Ajax web forms part, I'm not going to talk extensively about, but fact of the matter is that right now development has taken a little bit of a hybrid approach where for the server side, MVC and web forms on .NET, MVC is seeing more tractions. Web forms still exist. People still develop on it or still maintain applications on it. There's still a lot of very sophisticated controls for web forms. And in Sitefinity, you can use both. But today I'm going to talk mostly about this part, about using MVC and REST services. And in fact, the server side code that I'm going to show is going to be very minimal, sort of trying to get you into your JavaScript and your HTML as quick as possible into an Angular app and get you started from there. So with that said, these are the things that I'm going to talk about. I've sort of separated them with little charms here, right here. So first database, then we'll talk about just exposing this database, binding it, showcasing it, whatever it takes to get it into HTML elements and DOM elements and JavaScript and services. And then we're going to build out this Angular app. So I'm going to show you how exactly this is built. Now, the example that I'm going to go through, it's not the most sophisticated example in the world, but still, an hour is not enough time to go through something more robust. But this incorporates quite a few interesting features of just this whole interaction, and it actually incorporates quite a few technologies as well. So first off, we have Sitefinity. As you can see here, edit widgets and layouts. You can go to analytics, you can edit content. You have Sitefinity. This is a Sitefinity page. In fact, this is the home page of my site. And you also have some Sitefinity layouts. So I've dragged and dropped these layouts to do this type of parallax sliding, and I have used, I believe, Stellar.js. Stellar and waypoints in order to sort of make the slides look the way they are. They're probably looking a little bit clunky on your GoToMeeting right now. Then the primary part that I'm going to dissect later on is this widget right here, which basically incorporates a few things. So this is content hosted within the CMS. This is information that I have within my CMS. And I can just go ahead and display it here, and I have enabled some Kendo functionality. In this case, the Kendo sortable widget. Then I also have two sortable widgets here that are connected. I stole that little demo from the Kendo website, and I've added a little bit of functionality to that as well. So this is feeding data from Sitefinity. This is data that content authors can author and manipulate and change images and things like that. And I've added functionality so that I resurface, for example, a bunch of list items here, a bunch of juices, and then I can say, oh, I hate kale and I hate carrots. And then it can say, oh, well, okay, actually, carrot. I didn't make it plural sensitive. And then I can just make it disappear, but then I can say, okay, I changed my mind about pick carrots and I really like pears. So if I was running a juice company or, going to a website, then I can just add it to my shopping cart and just go ahead and purchase it via e-commerce in a different scenario or something like that. And this is the scenario that we'll go through. So this incorporates MVC to display those, Web API to bind those widgets. It has an Angular app to manage these interactions of adding and deleting different things that you like, different things that you dislike. It includes Kendo sortable, so Kendo drag droppable, and I haven't really made it work with the Angular so far, so please don't judge me. But you can drag and drop, and potentially the idea is you can change and move things you hate into things you love, and you can move from here to here, and so on and so forth. Um, and as we go through that, you will see how in Sitefinity this idea sort of evolves from initial data structure into HTML and into JavaScript, and it's something that could take you, maybe a couple of days to develop or something like that, or a day or a few hours. So with that, let's get started real quick, and let's get a little bit deeper into those interactions. And of course, what you will see today is going to be, unless I specifically sort of annotate this as being part of Sitefinity Feather, this is going to be just things that are available currently right now. It's with Sitefinity 7 that are not in alpha, they're stable and things like that. I'm going to also talk about a little project, or actually a big project, that I'm very excited about, which is Project Feather. This is open source. This is a UI framework and a convention-based framework around Sitefinity to help you do front end your way. So convention based, it's mobile first, it's responsive first. It contains a bunch of bootstrap layouts and a bunch of MVC stock widgets for the CMS. So for example, an open source navigation widget that you can take and template and work with. So a lot of great stuff for front enders and for developers who want to work with this type of functionality, including a AngularJS SPA implementation of the little edit screens that show up in Sitefinity. And I'll show you a little bit more on that. Now, this is currently in a community technology preview release, which means that you guys can fork this on GitHub. You can play around with it. You can give us any feedback. Don't use it on production just yet. You'll see in the roadmap here. There's going to be some alphas and some beta testing and things like that. But you are free to sort of look at it conceptually, look at it from a QA perspective, if you will, and see those widgets in action. So this is actually really exciting stuff, and I have Feather enabled in my project, and I'll tell you some of the things that it does right now as well. So with that, going back, this is my little cheat sheet. I guess it's in reverse as well, but the idea is to go through these notions of going through your idea. Let's say my stupid idea of building a juice module, and then building out the module, the relationship, so relating juices to ingredients and vice versa, and then building out the logic that will expose this module into DOM elements in HTML and JavaScript and JSON and services, and then having this consumed via Kendo data sources, via AngularJS, via HTTP, or just manipulated in different ways. And the way to start here is essentially to think of the following. In my example, the example that I really hate kale, I have a module. You can think of it this way. I have a data type for juices and a data type for ingredients. So it's fairly simple. A juice would have, title, description, image, gallery, something like that, and it will also point to the ingredients, which will then have title, description, blah, 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 so forth. And so you can think of this simple diagram. Now, of course, this can go into more sophisticated stuff. I added this little stock photo here just to show some of the stuff that it can go into is different relationships between taxonomies and users and products and orders. The main point that I'm trying to pose here, and I do have one, is that you can go ahead and create these modules in Sitefinity really easily. So I'm just linking to the backend of Sitefinity with this button. This is essentially same site /Sitefinity. This takes me to the backend. I can go ahead and look at what's going on in the front end at the same time, and sort of look at my same application and the same things that I was doing just a while ago. And here I can go ahead and make any modifications to what I've created, which means I can create pages, I can create content, I can create e-commerce products, I can design templates and widget templates, manage responsive design, and a bunch of other features as well. So I know some of you are familiar with Sitefinity, and as I mentioned, I'm not going to go into great details about that. What I will show very briefly is how these data models are created in Sitefinity. So this is hosted and housed in a functionality called Module Builder, which is bar none, the most popular feature of Sitefinity. Everybody uses Module Builder. Everybody has a number of modules in their project, simply because every web project nowadays is unique. You cannot really get away with a static page and a bunch of news articles. Every web project has different ads, different, it could be property listings, it can be anything you can think of, and this module builder is intended to cater to that. So it is intended to sort of humor me in my juices example and allow me to create juices and translate this into Sitefinity language and say exactly what type of fields I want in the database. So maybe I want an image gallery, or maybe I want a video gallery, or anything like that. And I can go ahead and create those. So video gallery. And I can go ahead and create those and basically map my idea to the database. Now, I've already done that. I've already bound my example, but this is the main idea, that you can add many, many fields to this, and many relationships. In this example, I have pointed to a video gallery, which means that I can have as many like HTML5 little videos attached to this. And I have pointed to ingredients as well. So I can relate any data to any data. Now, this is a great new Sitefinity 7 feature. It has been out since April. And it is one of my favorite features so far, because this basically allows you to do absolutely any application scenario, um, even a lot of times without going beyond the UI. So here you can add related data fields, you can relate to news, to blogs, to events, to pages, and any other modules that you have made up. And in this case, I have made up a module called ingredients, and I have pointed a related data field to that. And ingredients looks very simple. So it has title, description, and a related media field. So it just points to a little image. And I've kept things very simple. So you can go ahead and create your modules. In any case, um, if you are not new to Sitefinity, I definitely recommend researching related data a little bit more. There is a brilliant article in the documentation, so let me quickly guide you there. So it's under Developer's Guide in the sitefinity.com/documentation. Under the Developer's Guide, there's a tutorial to recreate the DevReach site with Sitefinity. It has a video attached to it. This video should be on YouTube as well. And it has a number of different articles that allow you to create something like this only by using Sitefinity. So it's really great stuff, and it actually doesn't even have a custom widget. Oh, it has one custom widget, but it's mostly done through widget templates and managing templates. So a lot of great tricks on that. A lot of good things you can use to create these scenarios. If you happen to be new to Sitefinity, play around with Module Builder first. It's one of the coolest features. It's a really powerful feature that you can play around with. That said, John is going to probably talk a little bit more about how to expose this to um, to mobile apps. We have integrations with the modules that you create. There's integrations with SharePoint. There's integrations with the Telerik platforms and things like that. The main idea is Sitefinity, content management. You know, beautiful. I can create juices. I can create ingredients. I can match juices to ingredients. I can upload pictures and videos and select new ingredients and create them in context. And I'm really quick and really efficient in doing that. And at the same time, I can expose this to any application logic, including integrations and including, in my case, just a spa-like Angular app that I'm going to use. So this is my data layer. This is point number one, which is data, and it talks about managing these types of relationships and data. So no code so far. Some code coming up. So I'm going to talk about using MVC and using a service layer, so a RESTful service, in order to expose this as quick as possible to, as I mentioned, a JavaScript or some kind of framework or data binded to a Kendo widget and things like that. And Sitefinity, of course, comes with its own set of services. There's actually a lot of really cool services that have to deal especially with related items. So there's new REST API endpoints built using Service Stack, and you can use them and sort of get the metadata and query different items. Now, this is actually something we use within the UI as well. This is something that basically, you know, if you open up something here, you'll see that everything in Sitefinity is services. It is JSON coming back and forth. So the backend of Sitefinity is kind of a spa by itself. And you can look through the different JSON and different ingredients that get passed through, and you can use them for most part. A lot of the times you need to authenticate programmatically or authenticate via JavaScript and things like that. So if you want to expose anonymous services, you need to sort of write them. So I'll go back to that, and with this sort of lyrical emphasis, my main point being is that this piece here, MVC, it can be very sophisticated logic. It can be very sophisticated. You can use the Kendo MVC wrappers if you want to. They're not included in the license, but if you happen to have them, you can use those as well. In my example, the MVC part is very minimal. There are examples where there's a lot of MVC going on and a lot of just server-side logic and processing. But for most part, in the development of the stack right here, this part, you know, is growing to be more and more commoditized, and the sophistication happens here. So I even do the filtering with underscore on the front end. I can save this to, if I have a lot of content items, I can probably save them to app cache or to local storage and things like that. And I don't need to burden my server with a lot of that complex logic. So this is where sort of the JavaScript is going into, is less and less logic on the server. This is getting more commoditized. There's Telerik backend as a service, as John will talk about. There's different other things. And the beautiful things are going on here. When you use Kendo and Angular and just pure JavaScript or just pure HTML and CSS techniques in order to make something. So on my second point, which is the MVC, I just quickly want to show you how I built out these few things and just a few tricks that apply there. So I'm going to do the following. Oh, I guess I did that before I announced it. So I'm going to do the following. I'm going to look into the Visual Studio. I'm going to look into the Visual Studio solution and show you exactly how some of these things tie together and how this is brought about. So this is a project that has a few custom components. It has a custom template, which in my case is a master page. It's very, very minimal. So even the slides that I have here, I managed through drag and drop in Sitefinity layouts. So it has a template that can be found here in Visual Studio. And let me quickly show you here under website templates. This is my fancy schmancy parallax template. So I've added some JavaScript to the template, some fonts, I've added jQuery. and a little bit of JavaScript. I can probably clean this all up using require.js and have a lot of more maintainability. And I've also added a resource link to Kendo. So if you use this directive in a master page, you can pull Kendo. Within MVC, this obviously wouldn't work. Right now we're working in hybrid mode. So you cannot do that within an MVC widget. Just pull in the Kendo from the CDN or something like that, and that works pretty well. So Angular, Kendo, different things that I can clean up using require, and then just the different slides that I have here, just a few content placeholders that I drag and drop things into, and I just work in through Sitefinity from there. I drag and drop layouts and navigations and images and things like that. I also have a custom CSS that sort of just designs a few of the main elements like the header and this little section here and the different slides, and some of the typography. And then the only thing other than that that's custom is this widget right here, which houses all the different information that I have. So I was going to show you how MVC actually works in Sitefinity and how everything sticks together. And for the purpose of that, I have just a quick Hello World example here. I just generated that using Sitefinity Thunder, so you can do that as well. You can say, okay, I want a new Sitefinity MVC widget with designer, and this will create a Hello World example for you, and this will give you basically just a boilerplate MVC example. You would see that in Sitefinity, when you build out UI and when you're using MVC, this is just standard controllers, standard model classes, so POCO classes, standard razor views, and things like that. So nothing proprietary here. For those of you familiar with MVC, nothing, proprietary, with, a few little tweaks that are used to make this work within a CMS that was originally built for web forms on top of an MVC routing engine. So what is added here is a directive or attribute that tells this to register in the toolbox. This is again something that just helps Sitefinity add this to the toolbox, and when I drag and drop this from my toolbox onto a page or onto a layout, then I'll see hello world. That's the intended behavior. So in my example, this is essentially what this MVC widget looks like. If you want to learn a little bit more about MVC with Sitefinity, I would recommend, and I can point you to how to get to it, but it's easier to just show you how to Google it. So Sitefinity MVC tutorial. If you type that into Google, there's one tutorial right here that we released just a few weeks ago, and it takes you through Hello World and different data binding examples and some of the basics. So it can take you within about 40 minutes and talk in greater detail around how you can pull data from Sitefinity, how you can bind it, how you can manage links, and various other things like that. Going back to Visual Studio, there's a few other tricks that I wanted to show. So one of the tricks that I wanted to talk about first off is if you saw the fact that I had here, add new MVC widget with designer, JavaScript file, web API controller class or controller, you would see that this solution that I'm working with is essentially an MVC solution. Now, the trick to that is that this is a ASP.NET web application. So it carries all the features and can have everything from a web API to MVC to web forms to, of course, JavaScript and HTML. And the idea behind having these things, especially for those of you who are familiar with Sitefinity and are not used to seeing them, is that here in the CS proj file, one of the few tricks that I will show you today, we've added the GUID for an MVC project so that all these templates exist and show up without you having to actually kind of manually type in the class. So this is actually a pretty cool thing that allows me to sort of work with the project and get all these controller templates and wizards that Visual Studio usually just provides to a standard MVC application. Now, going from there, I just showed you a Hello World example. Our juice example is not much different. So the main idea here is that we have the same index method, which is basically the method that shows up whenever I hit a page that houses my widget. This method, this index action result method, is invoked, and here I can use this for data binding or filtering or any sort of server-side logic. In this case, I'm using this for data binding. And the magical sort of call here is this API call for get data items. And if you work with Module Builder, you will see that there's code references in the backend, and there's different things that you can access, so you don't need to make this up on the spot. But the main idea here is that you call this object called a manager, which is actually a singleton in Sitefinity, so you just invoke this object, and then you have get items, delete items, retrieve items, filter items. It has full Linku syntax, so I can use this for filtering and all these things that a controller is intended to do. I can pass URL parameters, I can bind to a model here, I can filter, I can add MVC attributes, I can implement my own custom attributes, and I can use pretty much most of the things that I'm used to in MVC with, you know, having in consideration some of the specifics of how Sitefinity works. For example, Sitefinity can have two controllers on the same page, and that's okay because a controller just injects some model to a view, and then a view displays it, whether it displays it on the entire page as classic MVC does, or just a portion of the page, which Sitefinity allows you to do. You know, both are viable things, but it's one of the things to be aware of. Moving on from here, my index method, as you see, just queries all my items. This enormously long line here is just intended to query the ones that are published, the ones that are live, so not take any that are drafted or awaiting approval or anything like that. And it just injects this into the view. So I just create a quick model that basically says these two properties, and I send over all my ingredients and all the juices back to the view. So there's a couple of magical types to be aware of, and of course a couple of magical methods. So one of them is dynamic content. Dynamic content is the thing that this returns. So get data items returns iQueryable of dynamic content. This is the thing you pass to your model. In a way, this is the thing that you pass to your view, and this is the thing we can expose to the HTML. So we're trying to get to HTML, and we'll get there in a second. So server side, I'm querying, I'm filtering, and I'm getting to the HTML, which is just a razor view, so it can be something fairly simple like that. In my case, my idea around the HTML is to house all my Angular logic, all my some of my Kendo logic, so it looks a little bit more sophisticated than that. It has a couple of things, and I'll walk you through them real quick. So we've gotten to HTML essentially. We've created a data type. We've just used a simple query. We used some filtering to filter out the ones that are drafted and not wanted. And we have passed this to a model, which now is data bound to HTML. So now there's a couple of ways for you to expose that to the DOM or to JavaScript or to data binding and things like that, which sort of talk about these elements here. So go back and show you real quick. So now we're on this portion. Now I need to hold control when I do that. Okay, so now we're on this portion, and of course we're not really talking about this thing right here, mostly about MVC and REST services. And I've talked about how MVC works. Essentially, there are Visual Studio templates, but of course this is nothing proprietary. The Visual Studio templates just get you there quicker. Sitefinity Thunder is one extension that gives you these templates, that gives you the Sitefinity MVC widget with designer template. But these are essentially controller class, Poco model class, CSHTML razor view. And you can work from there. Similarly, there's a REST service component, which is inevitably server-side. So you need on the server side, you need to sort of process the items and expose them in a REST service. We, as I mentioned, have a number of REST services available, so you can use some of that. You can sync your module with the Telerik platform and use their services and use their cloud. And there's various other things like that. These ones are fed through a REST service, and I've actually built that out using Web API. And my Web API controller looks pretty much exactly the same as my controller here, with the one difference that it actually sort of has two methods. So it gets all the juices, including their child ingredients, and it has a method to just get all the ingredients. And so the same dynamic model manager, get data items, the same type of filtering. I use some Linku syntax to just sort of fold that into a model. And then right here, I also get my related items, get my related ingredients, which are the child ingredients for each juice. So each, like all the kales and the carrots and apples that a juice has. And the magical method for that is an extension method called get related items. So remember this namespace, Telerik Sitefinity related data. You will see this in the documentation I mentioned before quite a lot. There are a bunch of very useful extension methods there about getting related items and getting child items and getting parent items of a related item. So for, let's say, for Apple, you can have a method called get parent items, which will give you all the juices that contain apples and things like that. So there's a lot of methods like this. This is the only sort of trick here. And beyond that, we just return an enumerable of all the juices with all their ingredients. And so that got us to where we wanted to be, which is Kendo and HTML. So next up, I'm moving on to the HTML component of things. Which is, in this case, my razor view. This is just a view that will be a little part of a page, right, as in this example. This contains the square of the page, and it calls on a bunch of scripts and a bunch of link references, including _JS and including my Angular controller file. So it also uses the Angular Kendo directives, which I find really handy. So you can sort of research them further on. Now this is pure HTML Angular Kendo logic. So the only thing that links this to Sitefinity is the fact that Sitefinity feeds the data. And Sitefinity feeds the data in two separate ways. The first way that it feeds the data is through the razor view, and just through virtue of being model bound. So it bounds to this juices model. This has an enumerable of ingredients. These ingredients have titles, and so we display them on a list. Then once you go through that, and once you go through that list, you get an unordered list with a bunch of list items. Now these things, they're not really necessary, so let me delete them to sort of clean up the HTML for you and give you an idea of what they are. And then you just get the title of the ingredient, and that's about it. So here you get all the different titles, and you get to sort of move them around with Kendo because of the classes that we've arranged for it, and so we've created a sortable object with Kendo. Now, that being the link to Sitefinity, let me show you a couple of other interesting links to Sitefinity. So there's a few, as I said, magical attributes. A few of them are these data-attributes. So data SF provider, data-SF type, data-SF field, and data-field type. And what they entail is basically the following. They tell my browse and edit to work with any markup that I have. So here I can just go ahead and enable browse and edit, which is a Sitefinity feature. I didn't have to work for it. The only thing that I passed on was just an ID and what field I want to edit. In my ingredients module, this would be my title. And then I can just go ahead and add any any pictures, any information, any ingredients, or anything like that, and just change that around. And then I get all the Kendo editing experience and all that good stuff. So yeah, have those in mind. Those come in really handy. End users really love that type of front end editing experience, and all you need to do is just pass on a couple of parameters. Then I've left a little bit of white space because this is getting now into my Angular application. I'm just going to share a few details on that, a few tricks. Actually, let me quickly show you just the link to Sitefinity, which is through this controllers.js file. So my controller essentially has an HTTP call. This is my Angular code. This is just standard Angular code. This is the only two links to Sitefinity. One of them is through a Kendo data source object. The other one is through HTTP GET. And this is actually a nice trick here, basically to register a factory and to use HTTP GET, and then you return a promise object, and then you use I believe it was then in your project. So yeah, so project service query, then blah blah blah, in order to basically wait for the service call to return the objects. And what the service call does is it talks to the web API controller that I shown you in a little bit. I forgot to show you what it actually does. Let me exit editing for a second there. It actually returns, all my juices and all my ingredients and all their child ingredients and their images. So basically, you can expect from that to sort of return a JSON or an XML depending on what content type you give, and you can use that for data binding, which I'm doing right now. So I'm using my Angular app, and I'm binding an object and then iterating through it and just using regular and Angular syntax from there. So with that, this goes back to my HTML, where you saw the links to Sitefinity. Here I've commented out, had this not been in Angular, how would this look like if we have created this through MVC and just data bind this normally. So you'll see an example here with all the data SF types and SF fields and things like that. So you'll get access to that in a little bit if you're interested in exactly how this works. And then, of course, we have initiated an Angular app. This Angular app has a model. This model has things like objects like juices, which contain all my juices returned from the service. This now has a child object called ingredients, and we can show the ingredients with their images and their titles really nicely, and actually toggle and work with them in an Angular mode as well, and allow me to say that I hate kale. I actually don't really hate kale, but just for the sake of the example. And then when you click the button, you go ahead and add some hate to kale, which externally just goes back to the Angular controller. And then when you add hate, you push another object to your hate array, and then you use underscore to do some sort of filtering and filter out the rest of the application. So again, plain old standard Angular. Tricks that I have used here are the fact that I'm using the Kendo directives for Angular. This is used just for the right here for the autocomplete. So this input field has a Kendo autocomplete directive. And here you can use just Kendo declarative binding and everything like that. If you're interested in learning more about these things, I know I'm going through a lot at once. I highly recommend this article. This is an article about, just if you look for Kendo Angular best practices, you would see a really great blog post by Burke that shows off some of those good practices that you can use about using observable arrays and these types of things. As I mentioned, what happens in this view has no longer to do much with Sitefinity. Some of the best practices that you can use there are essentially packing everything into into what Feather calls packages, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that as well. And also, you can use things like require.js to get rid of that madness. You can separate things into separate widgets. You can have them sort of talk to each other through means of URLs or through means of parameters or through means of just JavaScript and things like that. So a few of the best practices that come to mind here are, first off, think about your routing. So if you are having a sort of a single page application where everything is data bound, everything uses Angular, obviously you don't have much routing to think about, but there is a reason why CMS remains mostly a server-side generated HTML, and this is because of crawling. Basically, not a lot of websites can afford to have dynamic URLs changing up a little bit. So think about the routing. Think about incorporating some MVC and some server-side rendering and making these, clickable links. There's ways of doing that through master details views and so on. Also, try and refactor as much as possible. For example, if you find yourself calling this way too often, you can abstract that in a public property with a getter. If you find yourself using this way too often, then you can abstract that in a class, and so you can find yourself refactoring different things as you go about this, and that's pretty much it. That went through my entire application. Now, last but not least, I know we're a little bit short on time, but I wanted to share with you just some of the things around Project Feather and how it works and what it entails, and basically how you can look at it and explore it on your own. So the place where I am is projectfeather.sitefinity.com. Feel free to look around and come to this portal as well. Feel free to also join the conversation. We have a great Google community group for Sitefinity devs. And the main idea of this page is just a few informational snippets around what Feather is and what it contains. So it has MVC stock widgets, it has this idea of front-end packages and frameworks of your choice. They already released one for Bootstrap, which I'm going to show you. There's also mobile first idea around everything that's being built out using Feather, so responsive first, mobile first mindset, responsive by design. I'm going to show you the really cool new designers framework as well. And also talk a little bit about some of the conventions, some of the packaging that goes on. So there is already, as I mentioned, a community preview which combines three or two, I believe, stock widgets already, one framework, and then the designer's framework, some initial implementation of it with a few designers already implemented, some great documentation, and an idea on some of the conventions that you'll see. And you can get this off GitHub. So there's 3 projects to be aware of here. Actually, there is the Feather project, which is the main core project. There's also the Feather Widgets project, which contains all the different MVC widgets and different unit tests for them as well. So social sharing and content block and navigation exists here already, and you can take a look through their code. And then there's also the Feather packages, which currently consists of a Bootstrap package and a repository for a template that gets automatically created for you when you install that package. So actually, the way that you install Feather is through NuGet, and you can try that out. It's actually well documented here back in the GitHub documentation. There's some great documentation there. In order to get started, you basically need to point to the NuGet repository in NuGet and just install Telerik Sitefinity Front-End, and then you're good to go. Or you can install Telerik Sitefinity Feather, add a few things. So add this directive in assembly info, add these services, and that's pretty much it. Now have in mind this is community preview, this is pre-alpha still. Alpha is going to be out in June, so make sure to not use this on production, but definitely use it with testing purposes. Any feedback is welcome on that. Now, let me quickly show you a few of the things that Feather did really nicely already. As I mentioned here, the documentation is great. Let me go back here. The documentation is really good. I definitely recommend going through a few of the things. Starting from the first one, the first key and crucial element that you can have um, uh, MVC widgets in separate assemblies. Now, before this was also possible, you needed to override the view engine. The Feather infrastructure allows you to basically say, okay, well, let me have a separate assembly. I think I had one here already. Let me add a separate assembly, and here I would have an MVC folder and just the standard model, views, controllers, the same thing that we used to have before in Sitefinity web app, but I'm going to compile this as a DLL and then dump this in the bin directory of another folder, and it's going to be self-installing because of this directive here and because of the controller container line here in assembly info. So beyond that, you can see here that nothing really special happened. I have an MVC folder, even in the separate assembly, where I would have controllers and, there we go, different controllers and models and views and all the same things that I would with MVC. And I would also be able to do a few more things with this. Just going through the documentation, I will show you examples of a few of these initially, and point you to how exactly to read into the source code. So the first really cool thing that we created here is the Angular framework for designers. So basically, what this means is the following. Let's assume here, I'll pull up my project here once again, and I'll have my controller. And so assume here that you have a public property of the controller, and you would think, what is that? What is a public property of a controller? The idea is that in Sitefinity, in the backend, you have these edit screens. So you drag and drop a widget, drag and drop something onto a page, you click edit, and it allows you to either type in some HTML or pick an image or type in some text or set some filtering or paging, and those are things that we can set as properties. So what I have here essentially is just one property called message, and what this documentation tells me is, well, this is the convention. Okay, we have a controller. We don't care about that. The controller has a property. The convention is create a designer view dot viewName dot cshtml, and this is automatically your designer. So automatically, if we create this file designer view dot default dot cshtml, and we add one line of code, Sitefinity already has the framework where it creates an Angular controller, and it passes into the scope variable all the properties. So I can just grab my properties.message.property value and bind it to an input. And so what happens is essentially the following. So Sitefinity, let me go back to this page real quick. If you go back to Sitefinity, you can basically expect to see the designer in action. And I'll show you a couple of examples of how designers used to work like before, and as opposed to how they work like now. So for those of you who've worked with Sitefinity, you know that Sitefinity Thunder has a great wizard to generate designers. However, they're very heavily based on Ajax and on web forms, and so updating them was not the most easiest task in the world. Now these, I'm especially a fan. I really like Angular, so um, these these show a great example of what you can do. So here's an example of a classic designer. I type in some text here, and then I save this, some HTML displays, and then this is an example of my Hello World designer. So this is an example of the same content block. Oops, let me actually rephrase that a little bit. This is an example of the same content block that I saw above there, only this time written in MVC, and I can go ahead and click. And then you see that this designer now is not web forms based. There's no red editor. Instead, this shows up with the Kendo editor, and I am saying hello Kendo editor. Hitting save, this persists. And this happens only through Angular. There's no client script controls and script descriptors or anything like that that happens around here. Now, if I were to drag and drop my Hello World widget, this will basically show up my Hello World designer. Essentially, the idea is that it binds those things. It creates a default designer. If you want to, it gives you the ability to just add plain HTML, and you can extend this with Angular and with JavaScript. So the main idea here is this is how we bind a property. And again, if you're looking for real-life examples, just go to Feather Widgets, and you'll see what happens there. So go to content block, for example, into MVC, and here under, under views, you will see the various views that this implements. So this implements a simple designer view, and here you will see that the simple designer view shows whether the item is shared, and then shows a text area, and it binds that to the model of the particular property value. So going back, you can check out and see all the different files there, such as designer client references, and see an idea of how you can extend this and what exactly is the default client scripts that this calls, which includes Bootstrap for styling, which includes the default Sitefinity theme, and some JavaScript for the modal dialog, for the actual designer framework, for the property grids, and so on and so forth. And this is also explained in the documentation. In the next article, they say, okay, here's how you extend the client logic, and here is an example of how to add your own Angular controller. Now, there's a convention here of what suffix you use and everything, but you get to type in through that as well. So, yeah, go through these articles. There's a couple of very interesting things. The few things that I wanted to mention were as following. So first is this notion of packages. So a package goes beyond a template. It's a combination of a template and styles and scripts and everything like that. So in my example, NuGet immediately installed a Bootstrap package for me, and it actually created a template and just showed it up in the website. I didn't have to register anything. I just installed Feather through NuGet, and I have this Bootstrap template already available, and I can change into that. Now, this template, this NuGet template is pure MVC, which means that you would only see the pure MVC widgets that you have available. And of course, you can change that through the templates. You need to make a couple of modifications through that. And it also includes the Bootstrap default styling, including styling for mobile devices, including some of the Bootstrap classes for modifying the navigation, and so on and so forth. So you would see some examples of that, and you would see more frameworks coming in and more packages coming in for default Bootstrap styling or for Gumpy styling, and anything like that. And once again, if you're curious to see what is in that package, here you can see under Feather packages, we have our Bootstrap package, which essentially is the widget templates, the CSS, the fonts, the images, and the JavaScript. So it overrides, for example, the widget template of the navigation. It gives you a brand new widget template for navigation. And it also gives you some references to layouts and other things like that, so you can see what type of overrides it does on widgets, which essentially means that a package is something that you can reuse and reutilize. So this is this new idea of being able to package everything similar to NuGet and just install it somewhere on another Sitefinity instance or something like that. And you can see that they exist here in a folder. So basically NuGet installs the resource packages in a folder, and this folder basically creates everything you need. It's based on the Bootstrap framework. Here's what it contains, and here's how you can use it. So this is this idea of packaging. So once again, if you go under projectfeather.sitefinity.com, this is this last point of packaging. So the fact that you get to package CSS and images and templates and layout templates all into one, and just drop it somewhere and install it and move it around. The conventions we slightly touched upon, just this idea that you can call something um, master.default.cshtml and this becomes a master view, or the fact that you can call something designer view.default.cshtml and this becomes the designer without actually any much work. This is the great thing about this, that it's very, very convention based. So there are conventions of how you name things and they just work. Designer framework is this new Angular based framework that you can work with, and you will see more and more examples of stock widgets and front-end packages with different frameworks, as well as mobile first layouts and widgets and styling. So this is the whole idea around framework, and this is why um, we also call for feedback at this point as well, because we want to make sure that this works for you guys, that you you see your favorite front end frameworks in the roadmap, that you can provide feedback for whatever types of widgets you would like to see first, and various other things like that. With that, I think this is a good time to kind of wrap up. So just to wrap up, a few of the things that we talked about, of course, we mentioned maybe about 10 different frameworks within this whole thing. This webinar doesn't really intend to be a how-to tutorial. That's why I pointed you guys to more in-depth how-to tutorials. However, I hope it managed to cover just some of the things, some of the frameworks that are shaping up to be the golden standard in terms of how we work with things. So basically, things are getting into a little bit of this direction right here, right? I mean, in the past, maybe 5 years ago or however many years ago, we used to do most of the work on the data layer. We used to build backends. We used to build, use some kind of framework, and then have very heavy, very sophisticated business logic layer that handled a lot of different functionalities. Now things are moving towards the layer, the front end layer, a lot, and with a lot of complex interactivity and calculations and things like that through means of in the rise of frameworks like Kendo and Angular. We see this trend. It's valid in CMS. It's valid everywhere else. In CMS it's especially sort of handy because you get content and you get presentation, you get a framework around these entire things, and you can basically reuse and not really worry about some of the lower level things, and just in a few steps you can get to the JavaScript, get to the markup, get to the HTML. And with the rise of things like Project Feather, with the developments of projects like Feather, this is intended to bridge the gap even more and to build and bring modern technology, bring conventions, bring best practices, and recommendations, and help you get to the end result of your applications quickly and with cleaner HTML, with less clutter, with cleaner MVC, and just generally best practices and technologies that are overall pleasant to work with. So, with that, please feel free to ask away any questions. We're a little bit over time, so I'll try to address your questions throughout the call, or further on, we'll post them somewhere on the blog. Feel free to also look through our website. Now, this won't be here for long, but the page that you use to register for this webinar will soon become the house of the recording of this webinar. The recording will be up on YouTube, so you can revisit it and see some of the details that I talked about. And you can, of course, call us or email us, or talk to us on Twitter. As we mentioned, both me and John are on Twitter. You can find me here, and this is John's case as well, minus Python case. His is C# case, I guess. And then we can definitely try and respond to any of your questions. So thanks again a lot. I appreciate your time, and we'll be happy if you follow up with us with any feedback. Thanks again. Bye.